just on yapping. I'm gonna mute up and listen for a bit.
Hey, Flat Lloyd, are you there? Maybe he can't talk.
Yeah, I'm here. What's up?
You and I haven't been in VC much. We haven't engaged much. I was in chat with you for a minute, and I saw you trying to hold another flat earther to a higher standard, and I thought that was really respectable. I just kind of wanted to know a little bit of your background. Can I interview you a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I guess. I mean, to answer that question first, it does have a lot to do with this place, but also just because of the plethora of information that you get when you type in flat Earth on the internet. Very often you get, there's a dome, and there's the firmament's made of blue ice, and there's thousands upon thousands of lands outside of rings, and you get all these crazy speculations. And
blue ice thing, man.
The person,
I can't stand that blue ice, dude. That is the fucking wastewater from an airplane, dumbass.
And what sucks is some of those are like just straight up shills, right? They act like a flat earther, and they're just there to freaking poison the well, right? However, some of them are they're ignorant, right? And they don't realize that they can't prove that. Or it's like the guy who's screaming, but the steel beams are cut at 45-degree angles at 9/11. Like, okay, that's true, but can you go prove that? Like, what's it going to take to verify that, right? And things like that. But that's why we were kind of holding him to a better standard. I mean, don't get me wrong, I forgot we were in chill chat, so it was probably unnecessary. But yeah, man, ask away.
So what got you in flat Earth originally?
I actually happened to be observing the sky for my architecture master's class. And we were specifically looking at like the middle of nowhere, West Texas. And we spent actually about 2 months just like camping out there, which was a huge mistake in like January. Because if you've ever camped in like cold weather, it's not the greatest feeling in the world, at least in my experience. But in my case, it was for my architecture class, and we were specifically studying the violet hours of light, like the golden hour between 0 and 18 degrees of the sunlight. And it did occur to me that I was seeing a lot of things that I just never really noticed about the sky, right? Like actually measuring the retrograde and just sitting back and thinking to myself, like, wait a minute, these constellations have never moved. Like that is kind of weird, right? I mean, to be fair, that's where I had more of my aha moment, if you will, of going like, it was the first time that I said, are we living on a ball? Like I thought my whole life, right? To be fair, in 2012, when everybody was kind of searching the Mayan calendar stuff, sometime in 2011, I was like, I was looking into all these ancient cosmologies, and I was starting to pick up on things like, oh yeah, geocentrism, and that there was this flat Earth cosmology, right? Sometimes in an egg, sometimes in multiple eggs, sometimes in an oblate spheroid. So don't get me wrong, things were starting to get pieced together over the years, right? There wasn't like, I didn't wake up one morning, I'm like, haha, flat Earth, and just start telling everybody about it. In my case, it was definitely pretty gradual, but it definitely, I guess, started in actually the whole 2012 into the world kind of thing. I'd already known about 9/11 since 6th grade when it happened, so there was already, I don't know, I woke up pretty early, if you will. I had a contractor grandfather who on that day was like, buildings don't go down that way, and he was happy to share with me, his grandson, and explaining, because he was actually in the demolition business at some point. I don't think for very long, but it's pretty obvious, right? You watch the Science Channel, you watch the demolition of great buildings, like it's pretty obvious you can put 2 and 2 together, even as a 6th grader. In this topic, however, though, I do think it varies for a lot of different people. And one of the masterclass advice that was coming to my mind was something that I use as a professor is remember that you don't have to teach them everything you know in one session, right? You don't have to be fanatic about it. You don't have to increase the tempo. It really is 24/7, and the globe already lost. The funny thing is, like, it never even was. So you really don't even have anything to be insecure about. But sometimes reaching that level of confidence can take a while, and of course, knowing the arguments really well. But that definitely takes time, right? And also, when you're explaining to somebody else, you just got to kind of have to remember, like, somebody said it before, they're not going to become a flat earther in an hour. But you might plant the greatest seed. They might not even come back. You may never get any sort of satisfaction from this conversation whatsoever. But I don't know, in the back of my mind, I know that it's never really a waste of time. It's exactly what I wanted to do, and why I even started speaking about flat Earth in general. Because for me, in early 2014, I was kind of going crazy. My mom at one point, she was like, we got to put him in an insane asylum. He's nuts. And when 200 Proofs came out, that was a really big moment too. I was like, oh shit, I forgot. Like, look at the ground, not the sky, Chris. So even I made the mistake of, referring to the sky, because that's the way they teach you the globe. So, don't get me wrong, my fellow flat earthers out there, they're always going to bring up the sky. They're never going to bring up the ground. You know why? Because it doesn't curve. and they've never been shown that curvature, so they're only ever going to bring up the sky. So again, you have nothing to worry about in talking, or speaking up in these conversations. But yeah, I mean, a little bit of my story. 2014, 2015 rolls around. I go to Corpus Christi with a friend with a telescope, another architecture buddy at the time too, and we start looking at boats way off in the distance. I'm just like, fuck, like, really like smiling about it, because for me it was a moment of like, oh shit, I'd been kind of like wondering what else is it that I'm not getting about this place, just kind of subconsciously back in the head, and realizing that it wasn't a ball, and kind of just getting that I don't know, I think every flat earther has this moment where they really felt the switch, right? Like they really saw it for themselves, proved it to themselves in some methodology, and they start going from there. The sheet or the cloth starts falling apart with all these holes that you're putting into this globe model that you even find out is not even a model, right? Half the time the globies come in, it's hilarious. They think they have a model, and you also know that they don't have one. So I mean, you always have the advantage. So you never have to worry as a flat earther. But yeah, for me, in most of my cases, the way it ends here on Discord is they run out of things to say for the globe, and they ad hom with like, oh, well, you're just a hippie with long hair, or oh, you're just flat earth Jesus. So at that time, if they're ad homing you, you won, right? They literally have nothing left.
Yeah, something that I really find interesting about you is a preconceived notion I have of flat earthers. That's not necessarily something that anybody in the server has, caused, but I have a great respect for academia. My family's in it. My father's a lawyer. My mom's a doctor. I did sales, go figure. But
you wanted to be the creative one.
yeah. There's a lot of that in my childhood. I was a middle child. So I just think it's really, really interesting that you're directly involved in academia, being a professor. And I don't mean to call it a conspiracy theory begrudgingly. I just mean it as in like a culturally, what does flat Earth represent? It's very, in that regards, a conspiracy, which is not something academics normally go for. So that's what I find so interesting.
Globe is a conspiracy. Remember that.
Well, I'm not trying to paint it as one. I'm trying to say, like, culturally, what is it, right? I'm just saying culturally that's where it falls. I'm not trying to make a claim.
Right. It's funny, right. It's kind of what you're saying, like, oh, wow, it's not so much a conspiracy theory, but it's the fact that, wow, there's this teacher who actually looked outside the textbook. Are you serious?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like, does that, do you ever bring it up with your peers? Does this impact you professionally? Do you, like, take a look at your material in a different way? I just think it's interesting.
Well, for me, it kind of go hand in hand. And to be fair, I was a flat earther before I became a professor, right? I have my own business and practice in architecture, and I do a lot of like custom residential. And I find that my clients are definitely much more open-minded individuals. They're usually people that are, I'm not gonna lie to you, they're really rich, and they teach me about the fiat currency system. They taught me about money. They taught me about money markets, just investing in all these different, things of how even just money systems work. So very often I'm finding myself running into these people regardless, right? People that are thinking outside of the box. Even in academia, I mean, don't get me wrong, some of the old guys, they had a student one time that said flat Earth, right? And they came up to the faculty meeting. There's like, I got a student who really thinks the Earth's flat. And I did respond. I go, well, how do you know they're wrong? And he didn't say anything to me, and he's a really good guy, really laid back, but he's also 75. He wasn't going to argue with me. He's like, I'm looking for the door, I'm not. So, I mean, don't get me wrong. There's some that are like, they'll just look the other way. However, there's some, they're trying to make a name for themselves. They're very egotistical. They go by the book. And in fact, some of them wrote the book that they're pushing on their students. So, I mean, don't get me wrong. I wouldn't ever express it to one of those guys. And to be fair, I've never ran into one of those types of guys that know that the Earth is flat anyway, just because they're so blinded by themselves.
You were telling us a little while ago about a peer or a co-worker that approached you in the car park and said that they saw you interview Eric Dubay and shook your hand.
Yes, they definitely exist. And yeah, thank you, Tivo, because that would scare the shit out of you, And it was funny, he wasn't a professor or anything. He was an administrator. He was a little higher up than me, but he really was just kind of like an accountant and, just handled all the business. Long-haired dude, all white, slick back, looked like a real awesome, chill guy that I wouldn't even be surprised has maybe even flown through this Discord once or twice, now hearing about the video. But yeah, he did. He walked up and he was like, hey, are you that guy that talked to Eric Dubay? And at first, I kind of like looked behind me and like froze like a deer in the headlights, like, is he talking to me? Is he calling me out? Who else is around? Like, I did have to go all tribal real quick. Like, wait, is my boss nearby? 15 feet away? Like, because it is one of those things that, to answer his question, could definitely get you terminated, right? I learned that pretty quickly during the 2020 stuff. I stood up pretty tall in Texas, and I even gave lectures to the entire faculty body about the effectiveness of face diapers. And I shook a lot of cages, and it could have been the reason why I think I was actually why they promoted me to be in the position that I am of the architecture department. Because I stood up for what's correct, and what, in this case, what the book says, So, don't get me wrong, I know when to use it against them, but when it comes to this topic too, I teach perspective, and I still teach analog drafting. And we do a lot of computer stuff and rendering, and that's all important too, to know how that works, which is flat, by the way, not globular. Anyway.
Can I butt in for a minute? What would the professional, he's like, Lloyd Wright's a flat earther. What could they possibly beef with him about being a flat earther? He makes an architectural drawing. He draws a curve, and they're like, well, how do I build this? And they're like, and if he said use a level to build a curve, they fire him for that, right? So,
they'd laugh. Yeah,
exactly. Like in architecture, using just planar geometry, right? Just straight Euclidean geometry. He should be fired if he was a glober, trying to build things using spherical geometry.
But it's funny you say that, because the only time a globe even comes up is for some sort of ideology about how architecture is, man, don't get me wrong, it is probably the most consumption of energy that we do on Earth, right? All the sandwiches, all the water that go into the workers, over time, melting steel, taking it out of a rock, putting it back together. Yeah, it's a lot of energy. I get it. But the only time they talk about the globe is global warming and, recently climate change. They have Mars architecture, but to be fair, just like physics, you have theoretical physics and practical and experimental physics. You have a group of people that are focused on the objective reality, such as practical physics, whereas the experimental physics guys, physics. They're not worried about shit.
Yeah, you're talking about applied physics. Applied physics is completely different than that other crap.
But we have the same thing in architecture, where you have people who definitely focus on the practical aspects that have to work, period, right? And of course, those lend to talk about actually flat Earth all the time. And in fact, I'm always talking to my students about the horizon, measurements, level, different topographies. And it's really funny how much you can talk about flat Earth without even saying the word flat or Earth, at least in combination. But yeah, it is one of those things that you probably have to be a little bit observant to realize, oh, wait, they never brought up the globe. Wait a minute, there is no globe button in AutoCAD. Wait, why don't we use this thing at all? And
to be fair, with all due respect to your mother and father, I don't consider lawyers and doctors academics unless you're a research doctor.
Oh, shots fired.
But I don't know, man. Do you just want to start slinging insults at each other?
No, whatever, bro. It's not academics. Academic is someone that works in academia.
Okay, got you. I would say an academic is more of an archetype of person, somebody that learns, that is educated, and that values education. So I don't think you become an academic or stop becoming an academic just because you went to school. So, whatever, man.
So if you take a bunch of classes, you magically become an academic?
No, I would say that it depends on the archetype of the person. You could take a lot of college, you could get a bachelor's degree, you could not be an academic. Does that make sense? It's a type of person.
I'm just trying to figure out what the distinction is. How do I know academic versus a non-academic? What are the properties one has versus the other?
They have parties, and they all.
A lot of them, you'll figure it out.
Their noses turned up a little bit.
Talk to a lot of them. I used to work at General Dynamics and talk to a lot of academics. There was 1,000 freaking academics, PhDs in electrical engineering, computer science, you name it, every possible freaking field you could think of, because the Defense Department does fucking everything.
What was it you said to me? They didn't get the right degree or whatever, so they're not an academic? I'm just going to tell that to you, man.
No, that's a straw man.
Okay, well, whatever.
No, you're not an academic. You're just straw manning what I said.
I knew what you meant, Aveitt. Just like, somebody who, puts education or values knowledge maybe at a higher degree than somebody else. Maybe even in a normal, traditional sense like we have under our current societal norms, right?
Yeah, under the definition of academic I used, a lot of you would be considered academics.
Sure, but you do have to understand, even in academia, they have a complete differentiation of the Associates of Arts and Science, knowing very well that those are completely two different disciplines.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I would say both aren't necessarily who's just memorizing stuff, and one is actually pressing, or pushing, or being creative with knowledge. I usually say the academic is actually one who goes, well, what if I make the science of art or the art of science?
I think that there's probably a lot more fringe investigation going on amongst academics and within, the education system, people in that field, those fields of study, learned people, right, than what is known about, because, like you said before, there's a stigma and that goes along with it, which would force them not to voice their opinions or their findings, their research, etc., in fear of being ridiculed and losing tenure and all that shit.
Yeah, and I mean, why lose all that, stuff that you've been working on and all that stuff just to be like outspoken about flat Earth when it's already kind of put in the documentation anyway? Like, oh, we just assume that it's flat and stationary. Like, nobody had to like get outspoken and like lose their job over it. They were just honest. They're like, hey, this machine isn't going to work unless we do and assume this, right? But I actually do the same thing when we're drawing perspective, like a 1 or 2 point perspective. I don't say assume, but I go, we have to look at the level horizon. I teach the vanishing point and why that works with your optics. And it's a really good introduction for a lot of, I think, students that are trying to build for reality. I mean, what's really nice about my job is I get to be really quote unquote scientific and quote unquote artistic, right? Architecture seems to be this really nice blend. So very often, if I'm a little too outspoken about what science really is, because I do ask my students the same thing, like, hey, does anybody in class know what science is? And they'll go, absolutely blank. They don't know, just like you ask it here. Or they'll say, well, it's the study of something. Or anybody else, And actually, it wasn't until last semester I had a student actually speak up and go, it's a cause and effect relationship, right? Where you take a control and independent value and a dependent value, and you put it, under some sort of questioning in order to derive an answer. And I was just like, thank God but I did also make it clear to my students. I go, look, only one of you even knew what science was. So as a college student or an academic, right, I challenge you to find this to be much more important and to add to your catalog, because it's going to help you along the way, to tackle more information. And I think the same thing applies with flat Earth, which, honestly, I think the last time we had one of these like kind of masterclass things, the one I went to was when Miggy was talking about the 3 points. And I got to tell you, like when it comes to this conversation and this topic, like it doesn't matter if you're talking to dogs or gods or April Tools, who's not even listening and is an absolute drunk. Everybody can understand the 3 points, that the globe has been boiled down into who measured the curve anytime in history. Okay, 1. Number 2, who's measured the rotation or the spin of this claimed globe. And number 3, how do we have the environment that this globe is in? And if there's been any time that I've even felt in trouble about flat Earth, obviously not on Discord, but sometimes in real life, right? I've argued with my 75-year-old grandfather who's like, he's like one of those guys who's not afraid to really like punch you in the face, So like, Grandpa, I love you. You asked, it is Thanksgiving, be thankful, But, those 3 points kind of saved me too. Like, well, let me just give you 3 points to think about. And we can come back to it. We can go from there. But man, I have a lot of fun.
Your grandfather's a baby boomer, is what you're telling me.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah, that explains everything.
He's always right.
Yeah, he's always been right. Like all baby. There's a documentarian named David Hoffman on YouTube, and he's been like doing like these like documentary films since like the 60s. So they're like old stuff that he filmed that he uploaded to YouTube, and a lot of them is like interviews with baby boomers and the culture back then and things like even back then they were calling them spoiled brats. Like everybody knew, like even then, that the baby boomer generation are just a bunch of like entitled spoiled brats. Even worse than like nowadays. They call like Zoomers like entitled brats, but they were even worse back then.
Yeah, I mean that's what.
Yeah, and like there's a historical record. The guys made the documentaries. Like these are like black and white films that he filmed on like Super 8, right? The Super 8 film. So it's very pretty enlightening because he did these interviews like over a period of like 50 years. He like tracked like the generation, and their attitude, like just their entitled attitude, just never changes. They're right about everything. They're never wrong. Everything they do is perfect. Everybody else is just a bunch of fuck ups. It's pretty crazy.
Well, they're masters of disengagement and avoiding conflict. And they're like the ultimate echo chamber.